Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Back of the room, can you hear me? Yes. Smiling faces, waving hands. That's good. We're going to get started in just a moment. Good afternoon, everybody. All right. It's 1:17. Let's get started. So, hi. I'm Laura Mann, and I work for Frankly Green and Webb, a consultancy that works with museums. And my job this afternoon is mostly to get out of the way and let the three smart people who are sitting next to me talk. And that's Jane Alexander from the Cleveland Museum of Art, Douglas Hegley from the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, or MIA, and Agnes Stauber from LACMA. So this, and in case you're wondering, this is funding models for museum technology projects. If you thought you were going to hear about something else, leave now. And this is going to be a pretty rapid fire process. So, without further ado, I think I did the introductions already, but please note Twitter handles, so you can feel free to give credit where credit is due or complain about the right person. And so, why are we actually here this afternoon? We're here this afternoon because the current funding models for museum technology projects are, well, I would say broken. Because I think there's a fundamental misalignment between the way our current funding models are organized and the way technology projects actually work. That's probably not news to anyone in this room. But in the interest of being clear, our funding models, as any of you who've ever worked on a grant cycle have experienced, are quite extended. It could be 18 months between the time when you write the grant proposal and you're actually using the money. That does not line up with technology, the rapid change of technology. Specific deliverables. Grant proposals generally involve being very specific about what you're going to use the money for. Doesn't really accommodate the iteration that should be part of any good technology process. I think that it's safe to say that for most, not all, funding sources, failure is generally not an option. They are inherently risk averse. That is slightly contradictory with the fact that they may want, or say they want, innovation, but don't fail. And I think any good innovative technology project is going to fail, maybe more than once. Projects in museums are generally funded on a project basis, as opposed to a process. You're going to try to solve a particular problem, but you don't actually know what you're going to end up with at the end. Or, and project-based funding certainly does not account for the ongoing maintenance and sustainability that projects require. So you can find funding to build something, but it's very hard to find funding to keep it going for the next, let's say, 2 to 4 years. And I think funding models are inherently biased towards brand new projects, which isn't always the best solution to your problem. So, so that's why we're here. So let's take a look specifically at some examples of the kind of misalignment that I just described. So, Douglas, you're up.
Yay. Deep breath. All right, so I've been at MIA for 5 years. When I arrived at MIA, there were two things going on that I just want to share with you that may sound familiar. One, I inherited this grant-funded project called eVovel. Does everyone know what a Vovel is? Sort of like cardboard discs that spin and tell you something, like phases of the moon or foreign language translations. Those are called Vovels, and they've been around since Roman times, right? They're very cool. Somebody wrote this grant. I have no idea how it got funded. It had 18 deliverables, none of which had any alignment with anything going on in the museum. I arrived there, the grant was 1.5 years in, and they'd accomplished absolutely nothing so far. So this is the kind of thing that happens, right? Some smart person thought they wrote a cool grant that was all about innovation, had no impact and no measurables of any kind. That was an interesting one to turn around. Talk a little bit more about that later. The other one is there were several grants coming in that had enormous technology components, and no one from the digital division had been involved in writing the grant. So all of a sudden, the grant is funded from a government agency expecting us to deliver something. There's no money and no resources available for technology, but it's a huge technology investment. So I had to go out and raise extra money in order to support a federal grant. Fun.
Jane, you're up.
It was really fun trying to pick what was your horror story, but just building on Douglas's was that we had Gallery 1 opening. We're in the middle of doing all these different types of projects. You have very little resources, people to keep these going, to support sustainability, to do the next iteration. And someone had written a grant that got us to do a story booth. And the grant's total was, again, we had no idea that this grant had existed. The new director wasn't that interested in applying it. What were we going to learn from it? With all the different stuff we were doing, it didn't really fit our mission, but we already had the grant and the time was ticking that we had to use it. No one wanted a place for it in the museum, and there was an area across from our collection wall that had been sort of not really, had been sort of just chairs and libraries, and I took the opportunity to say, okay, we'll put it in there, and we did it with another small project to make it our new beta gallery. And in that way, we had a place to try out new technologies, starting with this, just to get the space, so that we could try new projects to help people and sponsors see the kind of projects we would be doing in the future to get funding.
LACMA's Horror Story Project is our first multimedia tour guide that was funded by the Irvine Foundation and published in 2009. This grant cycle was for 2 years. So when it was written for the content production being done in Flash for Blackberries. And then the iPhone came around. The app was in the middle of production, and due to the grant cycle, we had to keep producing content. And the Irvine Foundation was kind enough to let us tweak the whole project and apply so you can actually look at it on an iPhone. But what it meant is that basically in the middle of the project, we had to start over all the content production. And when the funds ran out, there was basically no money left to keep tweaking the app, make updates happen, produce more content for the guide, and keep general maintenance going for that app.
I bet none of those projects sound at all familiar to anyone in this audience. None of you have ever had any of those problems. One of the things I just want to highlight from what we just heard is that I think everyone in the museum field is accustomed to not having money or not having enough money, but some of what we just heard is a problem when you actually have money, but it's for the wrong thing, and what you do about that. And I think the kind of pivot that Agnes described in terms of shifting based on how technology had shifted and going back to the funder to say we need to use this money slightly differently because of what just happened, or Jane's approach, which is to use a project that might not be the project you would have designed, but to make it experimental and see what happens, so that it has a different wrapper on it, I think makes a lot of sense. So, moving on to from horror stories to what we learned from some horror stories and doing things differently. Jane, you're back up.
So the biggest question everybody always is when we ask about Gallery 1 is where'd you get your funding? And in the building project, we were given $10 million from the Maltz family to create a space with technology, art, and design. And everyone's always like, oh my God, $10 million. Okay, anyone who's dealt with a gift during a building project, you don't get $10 million. We all know that. And so we got a third of that, which is still a lot more money than you can imagine. But we built a collection wall area. We built an entire Gallery 1 with 6 interactives. We built a studio play and an app that has AR and 250 iBeacons throughout the museum. That's a lot of stuff to do for $3 million. When I came on board, a part of that money had already been used because they had gone down this, sort of building something not within the whole mission, and so what we started over because I knew whatever we built, technology changes all the time. It would have to be scalable. It would have to be sustainable to do all these things. But when it opened, it was great. It had 31 increase in families. It became the test bed for a museum-wide digital strategy, and that really the platforms of digital, be it the website or digital signage, would lay in the IMTS department so that all the different areas of the museum could take an approach. It was all very positive, and as soon as Gallery 1 finished, everybody said, oh my gosh, so you must be having an easy year now that that opened. And first of all, it was the new budget year, and we asked for money to do maintenance and tweaks to the back end. Our app was taking 10 minutes to download. And I remember the first thing the head of finance said to me, which was another issue with our website, but said, didn't we already have a website? Didn't we already build this? Like, aren't we done? And that was like, oh my gosh, we had not even thought about the operating budget for keeping this thing that we created alive. So within that, I really took a change in that year. We switched around funds that we had, and we did try to do a 3-year rolling technology budget, because who here has started a technology project and finished it in exactly a year? And no one, right? So it's easy to do that in your capital line. Oh, sorry, Nick has a couple of times. I know. You actually have a month or two to just work on. I forgot that. But it seemed unreal for the rest of us, so I moved to we really need a 3-year technology budget. And for capital projects that works, but really getting the museum to think of operating systems for these projects in a 3-year is a lot different, and that was something we worked on. And then really working on corporate partnerships. We were having people come to see Gallery 1 all the time, see the collection wall all the time. Christy Microtile would call me every time they had someone. They ended up building 7 collection walls with microtiles in Cleveland alone. And I did those every time they call, and if I didn't have a meeting, I ran downstairs because I had a plan for the future with them.
Douglas, you're up.
I'm back. Great. Next slide. So at MIA, we don't have a digital strategy, okay? And look, this could be controversial, and we could debate it, but I have the microphone, so it's my turn, right? So for every complex problem, there's an answer that's clear, simple, and wrong. Next slide. So the problem with creating this digital strategy and trying to throw that at fundraising is you somehow confirm the fact that digital is different, separate, unique, extra, not core to the mission, and somebody else's job. And as soon as you do that and you're told, go raise money for digital, you're already in trouble, okay? When I'm raising money for the museum in my partnership with development officers, we're raising money for the museum, okay? And as Laura and I were talking last night, for many years, and all of us have experienced this, technology or digital was a vertical in our field, right? It's not, it's a horizontal. And making sure that your organization understands that is key to the way that I communicate these messages across MIA. So I refuse to do a digital strategy. That indicates vertical, and digital is not vertical. Next slide. So for us, again, it's strategy with a capital S, right? It's the strategy, one strategy for the museum. This is a sort of rubric that we're using for our current strategic plan that kicked off July 1. In here, you will see in every aspect of the strategic plan, there are digital deliverables. Certainly, digital needs to be used to accomplish the goals of the strategic plan, but there's no addendum called the digital strategy. Next slide. Now, when I arrived at MIA, everything was broken. So not just the core infrastructure and the switches and the walls and the Cat3 cables in the wall and things like that, but also the staffing model, the vision, the in-gallery interactives. We had these public-facing technologies. Some of them were 17 years old. Look at the giant screen that the 3 visitors, you can't even see it, can you? Right? Playing this little video loop. They were called interactive learning stations. Most of them had out-of-order signs on them, and they'd become places where teenagers would hide and make out. So there was definitely interactive learning going on. Maybe not on mission. That's okay. Next slide. So in order to raise money to fix all these broken things, you don't go ask for money. You have to establish why. You have to have a vision. What are we trying to accomplish, right? What are we doing here? They sit down with our director, with our board, and talk about where do we want to be in 2 to 3 years, right? And it's not, I want to fix the broken stuff. That's not exciting, right? We need to be out there on the edge of what is going on. Why did you hire me in the first place? You hired me to try to drive this museum forward into innovation, onto the leading edge of museum practice around digital. Digital for what? Digital for audience, right? For our customers, for the people for whom we really exist. A museum without customers is a warehouse. I don't want to work in a warehouse. I don't know about any of you. Next slide. So we applied mostly corporate funding initially, selling that vision to corporate foundations who can understand these things faster and deliver the money next week, right? Instead of through grant funding. We established TDX, the digital experience, as a unified, cross-functional, collaborative team that delivers digital through a very disciplined, agile methodology that involves a core team of no more than 5 people who are actually delivering. And on that team, you have education, you have curatorial, you have tech, and you have media. And Mike Mao's in the back of the room. I can see him back there. Hi, Mike. Mike's now at the High Museum in Atlanta, but he came in and helped me by managing the TDX project the first couple of years and got us on the road to really thinking about establishing both vision and to-dos and goals that we would implement in the project, applying the corporate funding. Once you have that track record of success, then you go to some grant funding because you've already got your direction established. Next slide. 4 key components, at least in my humble opinion. Ooh, I'm louder. The voice of God. Things to keep in mind as you're trying to raise money. Don't deny your gravitas, okay? Now, really what I'm talking about here is both your own sense of confidence in how you're conveying what you're up to, but every time you come to this conference, you're adding to your gravitas. You know more people, you have more information, you have people you can call for advice. Don't underestimate how important you actually are in your organization. Next slide. And of course, passion. Can you sell it? Are you excited about this project? Because if you're writing an 87-page grant application and you're really not excited about the project, why on earth are you wasting your time doing that? You should not be able to sleep until you get the thing done, right? And with that passion, when you're in front of a funder, you're communicating that intensity and that passion. You're bringing them on board. They're going to feel very differently about you. Next slide. Also, you're not really looking. The next 2 slides are kind of in combination here, and I'm playing off some things that Nick Honeysett and I presented last year at MCN. You're really not looking for a sponsor. You're looking for a partner. You want commitment more than you want a checkbook, right? And that's with your own internal team. I will tell you, I go with our development team every time we're trying to raise money for technology. I never ask for money, right? I ask for partnership. Next slide. And this is probably Nick's quote here, right? Don't ask for money. Ask for advice. Because if you ask for money, guess what you get? Advice, right? So ask for advice, you got a much better shot at getting money in the end. If you get someone on board and you share the passion with them and they start giving you advice and you listen to that advice and you talk back and forth, then the development person leans in with a paper and says, how about some money? And it's a lot smoother that way, right? And they're much better at closing that deal than I am. I'm slightly uncomfortable saying to someone, I want $40,000, but I'm not uncomfortable at all saying like, this project is super cool, I'm gonna tell you all about it and I want your advice on it. That works, okay? Next slide. This is the last bit here, which kind of applies back to that EvoVel grant. Anybody here sail? Anybody here operate a sailboat? So you know what running is, right? Running is really easy. When the winds is favorable, you just let the sails out and lean back and sunbathe because the boat will go the way the wind blows it and everybody's happy. That's easy. Guess what? Most of the time, the wind starts changing. Or you want to go there, and the wind's coming from there. But there are techniques for sailing in any kind of wind. If you know where your destination, there's a method called tacking, where you actually cut back and forth, biting into the teeth of the wind, but you're able to move to your destination. You're still on course, even though you're moving slightly left and right. So sometimes the funding comes from an unusual direction or has a sort of interesting appeal, like that EvoVel grant. What we could do with that grant is establish that vision, go back to the IMLS, sit down with the project officer and say, 18 deliverables, none of which get us to the goal. Here's our goal. I want to apply the money this way. I want to do these 4 projects, and then we'll see how they go. And then we did those 4 projects, and they were interesting. It's a little tough in the last year of a grant to get anything major done. One of them was a total failure, but that's okay. We learned something. It was a data visualization thing that just didn't work. But those things happen, and as long as you report on them and share them widely, you can still get more funding. I think that's it for me.
Agnes?
Yes, so I will talk to you about the museum's Art and Technology Lab, which is special in this kind of context because it funds artists directly and pairs them or enables them to work with technology companies that are our sponsors for that program. So a lot of the projects that are happening in the A&T lab are not actually translated into the regular museum's digital platforms. They are enabling the artists to work on their experiments. And this lab is based on its historical predecessor that existed between 1967 and 71, right after the museum was founded. And I want to give you a little bit of history background of that lab because it's important in the way of how the new lab is now structured. Artists were paired one by one with companies, digital and technology companies to work on a project. Andy Warhol was part of it, Claes Oldenburg was part of it, and also Robert Irwin and James Turrell. And the entire program was meant to create artworks that are then were shown in an exhibition, the Art and Technology exhibition. And after that exhibition happened, this program was, that was the purpose of that program at that time. Now the new Art and Technology program at the museum is in its 3rd year, and it's inspired by how the original Art and Technology program was run. But the big difference is that we're not pairing individual artists up with companies because these kind of arranged marriages didn't really work out that well. So what the museum is doing is that sponsors who are founding that program, they give the museum money to run this program and give grants to artists every year. And then they provide capacity as an advisor, as individual employees from these sponsoring companies come in to meet with artists throughout the year and give advice on their project. And in those conversations, when the artists are meeting with those advisors, conversations happen and collaborations between artists and the companies can happen, but it's an artist-driven project. The ideas come out of the process from the artists. The museum is not pairing the companies up, and the companies are free to provide their resources and ideas as they can and as they want. And all these collaborations that then happen throughout the project between the artist and the advisor company or sponsor company, they are based on in-kind support. So we're not paying the sponsors for that. They are providing that as an in-kind support. And so this cycle of the grant is interesting in a way that it shows you how the process is happening. Artists are accepted and awarded the grants based on the proposal that they have to submit. And then in meetings with the advisors, they develop projects and they develop ideas of how to collaborate with companies. The museum as an entity is facilitating that collaboration and the in-kind support, but the museum stays out of the project and lets the artist define the process of how they want to work with it. And that process in number 4 looks usually very, very different from what the artists have submitted in their original proposal that got accepted, because ideas are generated and things come up in these conversations with the tech companies that they might have not even thought about it before, and opportunities arrive, and the project evolves. What the museum is asking for, though, from the artists directly, is that they have at least one component of a public presentation where our museum visitor audiences can come and be engaged in the project that the artist is doing for the lab, and that they have some kind of a documentation of their process. And I want to show you an example of one of the founder artists that got awarded last year to do her project. It's Anina Rust. And she's an artist who came to the lab with her project called A Piece of the Pie Chart. And that is basically little, robots, one robot that prints pie charts. And these pie charts, they depict the gender ratios in tech companies, art museums, galleries, and technology festivals and so forth. And her statement is a feminist statement pointing out the underrepresentation of women in fields where art and technology intersect. So this robot prints out pie charts. They are printed on top of edible pies. And then the person who printed that pie is packaging up this pie and sends it to the company or to the festival people or to the art gallery as a package. And let's see. This is a picture of Anina Rust. She's standing there. And this is her during one of the meetings with the advisors. She came to the museum with a grant proposal to work on experiments to integrate more advanced robotics into her robot that is printing the pie charts. And she was hoping to repurpose appliances such as parts of fridges and vacuums to build into the robot so that the robot screams technology into the mysticity, and the female representation in these fields also is represented in a DIY looking but robotically more sophisticated robot. And then during the grant, she also had set up the robot in the art and technology lab, and she also created an interactive companion piece that is available online that's called A Piece of Inequality. And it's a web-based artwork of hers where people can create visualization of her data set and also contribute data sets on their own, from their own companies, from their own, whatever they're finding. And as part of the public engagement or the public presentation strategy, she had, that's a hard word for me to pronounce, feminist editathon. It's not hackathon, that's easy to pronounce, but the editing and yeah, I got it, yeah, right. So she had people come in and collect data sets from different companies for this database. And also while she worked at the museum during this grant period, she worked with archivists at LACMA to research the history of feminist protest in Los Angeles about art, and specifically LACMA's history with feminist protest, which there is a little bit. And yeah, so let me just explain again that in this constellation of the Art and Technology Lab, the sponsors who are supporting the program are giving money to the lab that is then being given out as grants to the individual artists. Additionally, they are giving time as advisors, and also once an artist is interested in working with them, they're giving time to in-kind support in the company to work with their employees on the artist's process. They're not getting promised anything. It's just a process. It's not, there's no product at the end, and that's the whole, that's the goal of the lab program, to keep it like that, and sponsors to understand that. And this is one of the artists who was working with Thackeray on an AR project of his.
Okay, so having heard some horror stories and some successful examples, what does this actually mean for you in terms of how you might think about funding models and successful funding models? So let's start out with Jane on that.
So to kind of what he said about no digital strategy, I mean, Gallery 1 was a test bed to begin to have really more of a roadmap, and actually all the visions that was in your slide, that was sort of the goals of our digital strategy. But really, to get anything done and to have next iterations, it has to be from a museum-wide strategy. It has to be stated in there what are the goals of the museum and how important is it. And so we're currently in the middle of a new museum-wide strategy, but there are many points that the director has even noted, like, really have to be part of this new campaign, this new strategy. So one of the biggest things is aligning with other departments. You can build something really amazing, but if nobody knows it exists, or if you don't have a great relationship with your advancement development team, or have someone who's really on these projects, you're not going to get the right exposure to be able to go out to corporations and say, oh, yeah, we want to get that same sort of exposure, and that really to have a partnership. And I kind of left us off with Christy Microtile from the collection wall, but when we were doing the next iteration of Studio Play, which is totally interface free, and we needed new projectors and all this, we got all that equipment in kind because they had already seen the value of, it's really a showroom for them. And what better content than our art collection? Like, it's cool activities, we're paying for amazing development of the interactives, and then the content is just gorgeous. So it was sort of a win-win there. So we also now have a development person assigned to technology where we really weren't before. We were always added on to if there was a project that someone else started. It starts with us. And that we lead this cross-collaborative team to really get there. The other thing is I work a lot with the development team to translate the tech talk, in the sense that I'll really have the highlights of what's going to be exciting. When we go to then one example is we were trying to work with Microsoft, and we had a development officer. I said, we had this lead, it got in, they were really excited, they know we use Connects, and I said, make an appointment any day except this week. So of course, 2 months later comes out, it's this week. I said, why is it that week? I'm not here. And they said, well, when I talked to someone on the team, they said they were interested in community outreach. And they went to, community outreach is this department doing this. I mean, nothing with digital or technology. And I was like, they want to see how community outreach is part of our project. So it's really important that they really understand. And we now have this collaborative team that really is getting things done. So the goals of we have become this public face for innovation, and what is not a lot of people always say, oh, you know, Gallery One are those outward-facing, glitzy projects, but that's not what we get the funding for. People have recognized that we're all about everything pulls from our back-end systems, that we have 32 databases, and that, you know, from the ticketing, from the parking to using your app, it's all tied together at different points so that the experience to the visitor is flawless, or that's what we aim for. And that is really sexy to the people who are sponsoring these projects. And one of the other things is when you get a sponsor, a lot of times when the project's over, you might invite them to the opening or the party, and then you forget that they were involved, and that is a huge mistake. You have to keep those ties. You've got to remind them when something's changing, because their feelings get hurt more than you know, and they won't be there for the second round. The other thing is we are currently now really looking for, we're having in the new campaign, technology is really, or innovation and digital is 30% of this next campaign, and really having an endowment, that's now a priority. And so that we're looking that we would endow certain positions, just like Philadelphia Art Museum's doing. And we are now have we're in the middle, all this is what we're brewing up, but that there was this thing of we wanted to have a subcommittee of the board, and then there's all these horror stories of doing that. And really what you want is you want an advisor, you want a voice, you want them to be known that at, you know, every other board meeting, you're updating those people who have links to corporations that know how they can help, because the board actually, if they can really help you, they want to help you. But if you tell them they're on the committee, they're going to have ideas doing stuff that you're just spending your time saying, we can't do that, that makes no sense, it's not about the visitor, yada, yada. And then there's two more things I say. One thing that's kind of I'm realizing is we're all reinventing the wheel. We get calls from vendors that are using really cool projects, but what about really being more of a co-op that, you know, that there's big and large museums that we all need a certain sort of app or something, and that we come together and we would put these platforms that build on together, so that as we do upgrades, as new devices come out, as everybody's not using their phone, they're using their watch, we can grow together, and that we can include all different sizes, and that we also have a team of experts now for how are you managing it at your museum, or what are you doing when this happens, and we're all using the same sort of product. And our visitors who go visit MIA and then they come see Cleveland, they already know the interface because they've already been using it. So this is sort of a call out for that is a big part of using our money more resourcefully. And then the other thing I just want to leave with, because go Cleveland, is seventh game is tonight, but it's been really fun that Chicago, Art Institute of Chicago and Cleveland Museum, every day, go look at it, it's been written up. They've been having a rivalry back every day with a challenge, and it's not just stuff with the Art Museum, it's happened with our orchestras. Chicago's did Take Me Out to the Ball Game, and Cleveland's did the Rocky theme. And so all these people who really, I don't think are into sports, have gotten into this, and everybody's social media has gone way up. And right before one of these, our new studio play was launched, and no one was really seeing it. During this campaign, we've gotten more downloads and more seeing and more exposure because we're taking advantage of a national activity and being part of it. And it's really, you know, something that I really highly recommend, you know, jump on that and be part of it, support whatever's going on in your community.
Okay, Douglas, you're up.
Yeah, you can go ahead. Yeah, what she said. Because honestly, Jane, you're a rock star, and you've done such tremendous work at Cleveland, getting that Gallery One thing completely.
I'm not loaning any money.
See, it doesn't always work, but you can wear them down. So pursuing the methods that on her previous several slides are all things that all of us should be doing. Hopefully most of you are doing them, and it's great, great advice. And when I saw Jane's slides, I'm like, I have to delete all my slides that say the same thing. So now I need to make new slides that say something else. So I tried. Let's see, try them on you and see what you think. It is vitally important, and I'm just going to probably re-emphasize this point, to craft the story you are telling depending on the funder with whom you are communicating, right? So one of the things that you probably don't know about the Twin Cities is that it's home, I believe, to 14 Fortune 500 headquarters, right? So you have 14 companies in town who have lots and lots of money and lots of employees. Why would they give money to an art museum? Some of them do sort of naturally. It's closer to their business model. Others want to give money that is more oriented with what they're up to. One of the pitches that I've tried successfully with a couple of them, look, they're trying to recruit top talent to live in the Twin Cities. Not always the easiest thing to do, right? Maybe General Mills wants to get the #1 woman in the world in cardboard packaging, okay? And they live in Rio, right? And the husband says, I am not moving to friggin' Minnesota, right? Well, okay, bring the husband over to us. Let me show him some of the technology stuff that we've been doing in the museum. Let me give him a personal tour behind the scenes, let him meet my team. You've changed the paradigm there, right? How much work really is that for us? We're excited to talk about what we do anyway. Super effective. So if you're going with corporate funders, you're trying to tell a story about how your organization creates experiences in the community that are dynamic, that are engaging, and that make people really happy and proud to live where you live. One angle. If you're going, with sort of control-oriented grant funding, you better be coming with details and charts and diagrams and have all your P's and Q's, right? Just think about what you're doing, because that passion has to be communicated through a particular channel. Next slide. One thing that I always advise any of you to have is a wish list. A wish list of projects that you would do if you had funding. And you better have some on there that are kind of hardcore tech, and you better have some that are really very visitor-oriented. And some of them better cost $5,000 or $10,000, and some of them better cost $1 million, because you don't know what opportunities will come up. And like Jane advocated, you sit down with the development people regularly, right? Bring treats, it always helps, and you go over the list. And they say, that, you know what? I talked to someone at a cocktail party the other night, and they're interested in that. So they have that ammunition to use to help you find money for projects you want to do.
I don't mean to jump in on yours, but like the Women's Council all of a sudden had $40,000 extra dollars, which wasn't enough for all these things Advancement was thinking about. But I was like, we're doing this whole advanced search and they can have powered by the Women's Council on the website. And they were like, we can sell that.
Yep. And sorry I had to keep this blank because I'm not telling you what's on my wish list. Next slide. The second part of the wish list that I have is for us, right? Our community. So one thing we should all dedicate ourselves to, and I think part of why Laurel really wanted to have this session, we need to establish in our fundraising a clear path from funded cool stuff to operational support. This is a challenge for us, and the language around that we use is going to be very, very important. The other thing is that shiny's not always important. Jane, you were making this point too, right? That Gallery 1 is very shiny and impressive and cool and expensive, but really what's important is keeping all of this stuff sustained and making sure it's connected and can live on, even if the collection wall isn't there in 5 years. All the work you put into that remains. We should also work together, I completely agree. I don't know that we'll do Art Lens, but we can talk about it. One thing for me, as I read grants for the federal government, I have for years, it stuns me how everyone asks for the same thing all the time. Why don't our federal agencies hold us to account to work more collaboratively? Why do I see so many organizations building things and excitedly announcing them to the press? And I'm sure they were hard work and really difficult to do, and yet they're exactly the same thing that another museum did 2 years ago with 3 different letters in the name of the thing. Like, we need to stop doing this. It's really kind of pathetic in a way. Each of us are doing these kinds of projects. We should talk more. We should talk more than just once a year when we're here together at MCN, in my humble opinion.
Plus sponsors love to be behind 10 museums instead of 1 museum.
Okay, let's see if this slide got completely mangled. Oh, only slightly mangled in the conversion from Google Slides to PowerPoint. So a few takeaways. I think that I don't really need to say plan for rapid change, but I will anyway. And I think one of the major connectors between the 3 institutions that you heard from is about alignment. Alignment with the institution's strategic goals, alignment with your funders, and alignment with your own internal team. I have to say the Art and Technology Lab strikes me as a nearly perfect example of alignment in that the institution is funding an artistic process. That's how, through collaboration with technology companies. And it's funding the activities of living artists. And that's part of what the museum does at its heart. So that I think abstracting from the Art and Technology Lab specifically and thinking about how technology and funding is going to support what your organization does at its core is really the takeaway there. Douglas just made a great case for the path from funded to operational, and really estimating the true cost of what you're going to build and thinking about what its lifespan actually is going to be. The funding menu that Jane and Douglas described, endowment. I think that is a topic that actually could probably stand on its own as the subject of a panel, but that is one of the directions that the sector is going in. As Jane mentioned, Philadelphia has endowed digital and technology positions on its staff. And so one answer to how do you get staff funded on an ongoing basis to support digital and technology initiatives is through endowment. Institutional collaboration, again, a subject of its own panel potentially, and then the outcomes and the impact, not the shiny object. And I think that's particularly true when things change in the middle of a grant cycle. But if in fact you've defined your project in part by the impact you want it to have or the outcomes that you're looking for, then when the kit changes, that shouldn't be such a big deal for your funder. And so now I'm just going to leave things open for questions from the audience. We have about 15 more minutes. Do we have portable mics for the audience? Yes, there's one.
It's not working. So shout out the question and we'll repeat it.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, when you stepped into your roles, did your development or fundraising departments already see technology as an opportunity to fund? How did you sell that case? Because it's not a traditional being a gallery, endowing a curatorial position, something like that. How did you sell that technology was important to fund?
Well, I would say we're still in the process of really selling it, and that has to be part of the museum-wide strategy. I mean, it has to be noted as, because everyone has too much to do. Everyone has too many programs. And the other thing that has been really important is that, okay, once Gallery 1 was open and we needed money to sustain it, take it to the next level, they would be writing grants. And then they would send it to everybody who worked on Gallery 1, and they would make the wording so that it took away all the innovation, took all away the technology. And the grants that we were sending them for were about innovation. And so what I was reading as a description would probably be any sort of family space at any museum, which is not to say that's a negative, but that's not going to get us the big bucks. Like, I would write back, no, we're going to write that we are taking away this and we're only doing this. And we got to show that this is something different and new. And that was hard for development to sort of understand, because they kept sending it maybe to the education people who weren't even on this next project, but to have what was their feeling about. And so it really means a partnership, and once you have someone really dedicated to you, and we do, it's a whole different way. These meetings are way more valuable because they know how to make that message. They just weren't getting what our message was.
It's a good question, Brian. And I think when I first arrived at MIA, was kind of in that situation. So IT had been separate and part of finance and had been a penny pinching operation for 15 years. That's one reason all the deferred maintenance, everything is broken, nothing had been upgraded. Needed money fast. So I could either go and demand that development find me money. How many of you think that would be effective? Right? So instead I go to development and I show curiosity and I ask them what their world is like and what I could do to help them. And I listen and I learn and I go and I read and I talk to my other colleagues and find out, how do you raise money? What do you do? What do these people face every day? What do they need? And then I become the most informed partner they have on the staff, right? So when people from other divisions go and say, get me money, they're like, ugh. But when Douglas comes, he's like, I have this really cool idea and I have 5 ideas where I think, So we establish trust by me learning about their world first, rather than demanding that they learn about mine.
Yes.
So, yeah. So these sessions are being recorded. I'm just going to boringly kind of repeat what I think you're asking. Why don't museums get together and work with the funding agencies, especially the governmental agencies, to have a more coordinated and rapid funding cycle and understand innovation better?
Change the grants that they're asking, change the grants they're giving so that they're more useful for the people they're giving.
Right, right. So in my follow-up question is, have you ever gone to the DMV? So anyway, I'm being somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but I think certainly there are groups of us and some people in the room who have tried to do this kind of thing in sort of summit meetings that are called by the granting parties. They're keenly aware of the fact that if they're trying to fund technology in, sort of 18-month approval cycles, that is really difficult. But the other thing that I will say, and honestly, I don't mean to diss government agencies, it's kind of the process they need to go through in a way in order to make it fair and transparent and everything else. But it's very hard for us to predict what we need money for 3 years from now. So again, Laura made a great point. If we are pitching grants for outcomes instead of for hardware, that's a very smart way to go. The second thing is I have yet to meet a grant officer from any agency, whether it's government, corporate, private, who isn't willing to have a conversation when you've gotten into a grant and you've realized that Flash on a BlackBerry is probably not the way we need to go anymore. And I have yet to meet a program officer who stomps their feet and crosses their arms and says, you said it was going to be Flash on a BlackBerry, that's what I want. Like, a funding partner wants to have impact. And, and if you treat them like a partner again, and you go to them and you say, look, we wanted Flash on a BlackBerry. There's this thing called the iPhone that just came up. It's way cool. We're not going to do Flash anymore, but we have this exciting direction we're going to go. Same outcome. You can do that.
And that's been my experience with Just Right. I mean, I was wondering if the government able to pivot like that.
You know what,
Mike.
Oh, sorry. What I would say, because I've actually been, I think even at the same meeting, reviewing applications and I've been like, you guys, this is not even, by the time they get this is already going to be out of date. Can we change the application? Because the questions they're asking put you in a position of stating things that we don't want you to state that. And it goes back to the outcomes, what you're trying to achieve here. So there's a pot of money and breaking it up into prototyping points. And, I feel like all those should have a prototyping step before you get the next implementation step. And then we get to really see what's working and not working.
Yes, right here.
Sure. I just very briefly wanted to touch on this question because I'm a program officer at the NEH, and we really are, we're listening, we're trying, we're constrained.
We love you. Don't worry. We love you.
That was Dublin.
But actually, in the next session next door, I'm going to be talking about a couple of programs we have. We're really trying actively to do things like create planning and implementation stages for our programs to shorten the time. So the main program I'm talking about today, we're trying to get it down to 6 months, which is still not amazing, but it's not 18 months either. So we are sort of thinking about how still within the constraints of federal funding agencies can we also be a little bit more active.
I'm not sure that got through on the recording, but basically we have NEH in the room saying, yo, we're trying. So we appreciate all of it. And we're happy to work with you to continue to help it be improved. And also, thank you for being flexible and allowing us to come back to you and say, that platform doesn't work anymore. Can we change it a little bit?
That's right. There is a lot of room for at least some flexibility. We don't want to fund a Flash BlackBerry thing.
I think we're seeing some changes in other government funding bodies too. I think IMLS now has, I think they're called Spark grants that are for smaller amounts of money, and they are explicitly to fund more experimental, process-oriented, proof of concept kinds of projects. I don't know about the projects that are coming out of those grants, so I don't know if they actually are succeeding in funding those kinds of projects, but that is a new grant type on the part of IMLS, and that really says something. But I really want to underscore the importance of thinking about what those grant applications look like, because emphasis on hardware tends to mean that you focus on hardware in the grant application as opposed to, say, impact and outcomes, which is, yes.
I was wondering, we're talking about this applications running in, wanting to build the same things, and some of them are already outdated before the project cycle will end. I think one of the troubles is that as a sector, we have such a wide range of colleague institutions with different sort of capabilities and different places on the learning curve of digital. So when we talk about maybe we shouldn't fund products but processes, maybe we should also think about funding people. So getting the right people in the institutions that could actually do the job right, instead of thinking we need some kind of app that is way outdated. So I often feel that it's the people that's lacking. And I'm wondering if both the granting institutions, the private funders, and we as a sector, as museums, can try and work on establishing that kind of mindset.
Just to repeat that for the recording, I hear you proposing that funding people as well as process is critical to institutions actually being able to execute on the kind of diverse visions and missions that we have, and that perhaps getting together as funders, both government and corporate and institutions, to think about how that might work better is what you're proposing. I couldn't agree more. Oh, yes.
My name's Sean, and I'm actually from the digital agency side of things. So, we try and form partnerships and actually do a lot of execution on projects for museums and cultural institutions. But what I'm curious about is what are some things that people like us on the execution end of things can do to help secure funding, to do some of this preliminary planning? And is there a spot for us to help with the grant writing and project, like road mapping? Before, as opposed to just coming to bid on a project to help develop something.
So all the vendors we work with actually one of the, we just worked with Design.io for our new studio play, but we work and encourage them to write their own story, do the behind the scenes, how you're making this magic work, and get exposure to like a whole different set of technology magazines or groups, and it gets a buzz out there, because if we take it from different angles, there's someone who's going to grab it and write a story that then we can use to get bigger try. And so we constantly, when we're even doing like the video or the production, we ask the team what they want, what they're going to need to do, what they have to do, so that we can do the best. Even though it's about the museum, it's really about everybody getting exposure to get this funded in a new way. That's what we do.
I'll add to that quickly. So Auckland Museum in New Zealand, they've been doing a new thing where they've been inviting vendors and other museums to design sprints on just completely random ideas. And they come together, they all just try out different things, 3 to 5 days, build some prototypes, try it out, and then go home. And then if something actually sparks and works well, they'll go back to that vendor who had that idea and develop something with them, or put out a proper tender process. But they've started doing this as, I think every 4 months or so, they're doing it, and it's been working really well for these new innovative tech solutions.
That sounds great. You know what else really want to bring up on the last question was the Tessitura model you were going to talk about.
Yes. So, okay. It's 2:15, so I'm going to talk fast. So for the recording, you were describing a new process that's happening in New Zealand at the Auckland Museum, of the museum team and a range of vendors getting together to do design sprints as a working process of rapid prototyping and testing. That's a really interesting model. I'd love to hear more about that. And I think to underscore what you said about what's the role of digital agencies in all of this, I think there is absolutely a role up front, perhaps in part, as Jane mentioned, helping to shape what the story is. Because I think as museums, in things like grant applications, whether it's for government funders or for corporate funders, we could do more showing and less telling. And I think the agencies have a really critical role to play in that, in crafting the story. I think that's probably particularly important for corporate funders. Okay, oh, and one last thing, Jane asked me to mention the Tessitura model. So, the co-op model, yeah, because that is to say, can museums collaborate to make shared pieces of software, hardware, whatever, shared tools and resources that they could all use? I'm sure a lot of the people in the room are aware that that's the origin of Tessitura. It was originated by the Metropolitan Opera, but what the critical thing was not that they developed some ticketing and CRM software, it's that they founded a nonprofit cooperative organization to manage and run and sustain the software. And I'm sure there are people in this room who pay membership dues to Tessitura in order to use their software. And that, I think, is one very successful and very interesting model for us to look at in other areas. Yes, it's based on the size of your museum, what you pay into the membership. Thank you, everybody. I think that concludes.